Now, your agency downgraded the U.S.'s AAA rating 2 weeks ago. It was the first one to do that. Now, at the time, you said your main concern was the high level of debt and the difficulty in cutting spending. But now that we've got cuts from this bill of at least $2.1 trillion over the next 10 years, is that enough for you?
Probably not. We put the rating for the U.S. government on negative watch as of March 1st. And then we cut it as of July 16th. Our concern is the relatively high level of debt to GDP. What's interesting in this discussion is that there's a lot of focus on the debt side and relatively little on the denominator, that is the GDP. What the U.S. has been in this position before is post-World War II, but at that time the GDP was growing fairly quickly because the productive capacity of the rest of the globe was in terrible shape. Right now, growth is hard to come by. In the first quarter, the U.S. realized growth of only 0.4%, and the second quarter is 1.3%, and that might be revised downward. So the question is, how are we going to get this debt to GDP adjusted? And we hope that the GDP is going to come back on strong. Normally, post-recession, you're looking at 3% to 4%. And as I said, we're at 0.4 for the first quarter and 1.3 for the second.
And with that as the backdrop and that as your main concern, the GDP and growth, we also just got some very disappointing data. Manufacturing data showed a slowdown in June. We also got a drop in consumer spending. So in your view, what is the solution to get growth back in the U.S.?
You know, it's not obvious. We've already spent the money. The total debt for the U.S. has grown over the past 5 years from $8 trillion to $14 trillion. That's a $6 trillion increase. And then we basically have a clash in ideologies whereby the Tea Party is using the approach whereby government, it's basically a laissez-faire approach whereby the government it gets in the way of growth, and they would prefer that government be minimized. And the so-called neo-Keynesians believe that a stimulus is important. I think the overriding issue here is that it's going to take time and effort to get the debt to GDP down to a manageable level. It's somewhat more difficult than usual because you have the retirement of that important factor in our country, and that is the baby boomers, who are going to go from paying a fair amount in taxes to retirement, whereby they draw on Social Security, Medicaid, and Medicare.
Sean, I'm sitting here in Hong Kong, and China and Japan are the two biggest foreign holders of U.S. debt. What is your message to investors? Should they be investing in treasuries or not?
The U.S. remains a very strong credit. We rate it at AA+. It's still very strong. It's not at the pinnacle that it was before. And there aren't that many alternatives. The Treasury market is very deep. We issue debt in our own currency. The U.S. dollar is a reserve currency, so it gives us a lot more flexibility than normal. I think there's a huge benefit to the spotlight being placed on this issue. We think over the next couple of years there's going to be some adjustments. You saw a little bit of that over the past week. It was difficult, but we got there. And it's likely that over time that the U.S. is going to get its financial house in order. What's overhanging a lot of the market, however, are the problems with the biggest buying bloc globally, and that happens to be the EU, whose difficulties are somewhat more intractable than they are here in the U.S. And we tell our institutional investor clients, and by the way, we're not paid by issuers, it's only by investors, we're suggesting that they watch the funding costs for Italy and Spain, because once you get to the critical level of 6%, then it becomes much more difficult to extract yourself from the problem. And then the funding costs have been increasing.